There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean Breeze Books. Welcome back to my channel. And another, in this case, it's a Saturday Reads. And let me tell you my little sob story. I filmed my Friday Reads yesterday, Thursday. It was now Friday at almost 4 p.m. And I filmed it as I usually do the day before, Thursday. I spent hours and hours editing it last night, went to bed, got up, spent a couple more hours finishing it off, but I was really unhappy with the audio drift again. And I guess I was so distracted by that I didn't really notice that not only was the audio drifting, but it wasn't recording like every fifth word. You couldn't hear it, no matter how much I turned the volume up. So I finished editing and thought, oh, it'll be okay. It won't be my most well-produced video ever, but then I started watching it again, and it was even worse than I had noticed when I was editing it. So I have decided to redo it all. So here I am, and the problem is the little handheld mic, the tiny Yeti, whatever they're called, Yeti Nanos. I think it's just worn out, or the attachment's worn out, because apparently that's what often causes audio drift. So I'm using my expensive mic, this one, and I don't think there's going to be any audio drift, and it certainly has beautiful sound. So I was just lazy, not wanting to have to bring it downstairs every time I made a video down here, but I'm going to have to, or get another mic for the basement, because that one's toast. So that was a waste of time, but maybe this Friday Reads will be even better than the one that you're not ever going to see. I hope so. So I think when I filmed it yesterday, I said I didn't have any personal news, and I don't think I do either. I'm excited about a book launch I'm going to in a couple hours. It's a book about a British queen. She was never crowned, but she was a British queen. Rebel of the Regency by Anne Foster. Scandalous Saga of Caroline of Brunswick, Britain's queen without a crown. She was George IV's wife, but she was never crowned. She actually went to the Abbey when the coronation was on. No, they wouldn't let her in. They were living separate lives by then. But it's all in here. And this author, Anne Foster, lives in Saskatoon. Who knew? She has a podcast, Vulgar History. I hope she will be my newest best friend, because I'm really excited about the launch. I'll tell you more about it next week. I have had a hell of a reading week. It's been amazing. Oh my God, I got so much to tell you. But first, let me say, if you want to join my Patreon or buy some bookmarks, here are my bookmarks. All that info's in the show notes. And I did actually get one video posted the other day, and that has turned out to be very popular. I've got far more hits on that video than I did on last week's Friday Reads. And that's probably because of my guest. For the first time, I invited Simon Thomas on my channel. He is a book blogger, Stuck in a Book, I believe is his blog name, and he is a co-host of a fabulous podcast called Tea or Books, and he is a consulting editor, I think that's the title, to the British Women Libraries series of books. And so when I read Oh, the Brave Music by Dorothy Evelyn Smith and loved it so much, I reached out to him. We commented on each other's stuff a little bit over the years, but we'd never had any direct contact. I invited him on because it's one of his, he wrote the afterword to it, and he loves it as much, if not more than I do. I don't know if it's impossible for anyone to love it more than I do. We had a rousing chat about it, which has gotten quite a few hits. So if you haven't hit it yet, to do. And it is a book that I would say the test for whether it might be a book for you is if you liked Anne of Green Gables, you would probably love this. That would be my spin on a personal recommendation. But it is the best book you've never heard of, if you've never heard of it or haven't read it. Anyway, so that's up there for your viewing pleasure. All right, I have one bail to tell you about. I have finished one book, and I've started a bunch that I'm going to check in on, and I'll be starting one in the coming days. We start with the bail. I am breaking up with Margery Sharp. This is the second book in about 6 months that Mum and I have bailed on by the British mid-20th century writer Margery Sharp, despite the fabulous title and cover, Rhododendron Pie, published 1930, brought back into print from the furled middlebrow imprint of Dean Street Press. Much like The Foolish Gentlewoman, which I bailed on with Mum a few months back. I read 50 pages to my mum, and I never got invested in anything going on. The characters didn't jump off the page. Margery Sharp seemed more concerned with describing in a ridiculous amount of detail how odd the interior decoration of the couple different homes mentioned were, and then expounding upon the eccentricities of the various characters. But I didn't get a sense of any of them as a three-dimensional people that would sit up or jump off the page. Not at all, so we gave up. Done with Margery Sharp. I had read one 5 or 6 years ago. Forgotten the title. Here's the cover that I really enjoyed, but I guess that's the only one worth reading. So one of the ones that I started because of that is another one by Susan Scarlett, the pen name for Noel Streatfeild. His mom loves them 10 times more than I love them, and I love them. And we're doing Peter and Paul by Susan Scarlett, also a furrowed middle-brow book. And this one came out in 1940. And these 12 romance novels that she wrote under the pseudonym Susan Scarlett, they are, so far, a bit samey. I don't think I'm going to enjoy this one quite as much because it's so much like the ones I've read, Close Peg in particular. But you can't help but love it regardless. So it's about a pair of twins. One is drop dead gorgeous, the other one's plain. And they're Petronilla and Pauline, and their nicknames are Peter and Paul. And they come to work at this dress shop, and plot ensues, and it's wonderful. It's repetitive from other books, but it's a happy story. It's a story that's making both Mum and I happy. This is the only book I'm probably going to end up fitting in for Black History Month, and I've gotten a couple stories in this collection under my belt now. It's called Lover Man by Alston Anderson, a Black American writer. This was published in 1959, and it sank like a stone shortly after it was published, but it's been brought back into print by McNally Editions. And this will be a pseudo-buddy read with one of my patrons and loyal followers, and I do mean loyal, Paul. The first one we've ever done. I've read the first two stories, and I really loved them. The first one is about a very unhappy family, and the second one is about two buddies that go fishing. I think the stories are mostly set in the 1940s in the Deep South. They go fishing down at the creek, and it doesn't turn out very well, but really well done. I just love the cover photograph. I don't know why there's two different covers for this McNally edition, but I have this one, and then there's also this one, which I like that cover too, but I love this one. Anyway, starting out really good. Really looking forward to talking with Paul about it at the end of the month. Okay, the next two that I'm doing a preliminary check-in on, I am going to gush. The short stories were wonderful, but the next two, boy, this is the one I'm doing for the Ben Reads Good Challenge. This February is a book by an Australian author, and I chose The Sitter by Angela O'Keeffe, published in 2023. And this is about the French, I don't know what kind of art you would call Cézanne. I don't really know. There's a picture. What is that? Is that symbolist, surrealist? I know what I like with art, but I don't know how to talk about art like in any kind of an academic way. But Cézanne was a famous painter, let's put it that way, 19th century. And this book is about his wife, Hortense. They were common law for decades, I think, at least maybe 20 years. Raised a son who was 14 when they finally got married. And Cézanne agreed to get married because he wanted his son to be able to have parents who were married. None of that's come up so far, but Hortense is a ghost in this novel. So this novel is about an Australian novelist who's gone to Paris to do research for a novel she plans to write about Hortense Cézanne. And Hortense is haunting the book and narrating the book. Now, 5 years ago, I wouldn't have touched this with a 10-foot pole, and I'm so delighted to tell you that it's working for me so much. Holy smokes, is it good. The writing is crisp and beautiful. The audiobook is incredible. The story on this I mentioned maybe last week was I bought it shortly after it came out because I heard something about it, and I splurged and paid for the shipping direct from the Australian publisher. And this is still the only way you can get a paper copy. It cost me $50 or $60 to get it with the shipping. But you can get it anywhere, I think now, on audio. And the audio is so good that I would encourage you, though any of you that are comfortable or like doing an audiobook just as an audiobook, this is one to try. Because I don't know who the audio narrator is, but it's just a joy to listen to. And all those things that used to trigger me about a ghost in fiction, I'm just not triggered at all. It's really beautifully done. It's early days, and it's really floating my boat. I have read even less of this, and I'm dying to do a preliminary check-in. This is the Dutch novel, The Remembered Soldier. I find this author's name incredibly hard to pronounce. I've had to look it up every time, but so I finally written it down, so I don't have to keep going back to the Audible audiobook, but I think I can trust how it's pronounced there. Anjet, translated from the Dutch by David McKay. And this is a novel set in 1922 in maybe Holland, certainly Europe, they would have called it an insane asylum, but a mental health facility, we would call it now, for soldiers whose war wounds were of that type. And the main character, I think, is a man called Noon, and he has recovered in this psychiatric asylum to the point where his only problem remaining, which may be permanent, is amnesia. He has no idea who he was before he was injured or shell-shocked, before he was injured in battle. And I guess there was no identifying stuff. I don't know the details of why there was no identifying things on his uniform or whatever, but he's been in there for 3 or 4 years, and he's finally to the point where the asylum placed an ad describing his physical appearance to see if they can match him up with a wife or a family member. And so the book opens with 2 interviews with 2 women. And the first woman comes in, we're in his head, and his reaction is, "Oh, she's beautiful. I hope she's my wife." But of course he doesn't recognize her. The woman, she says, "Oh, he looks like my husband. I think it's my husband." And so the psychiatrist asks her about any physical markings or like scars or something. And there was a scar on her husband's upper left thigh. And so Noon, the protagonist, he does not want to drop his pants. But the psychiatrist says you have to. And he didn't have that scar. So that wasn't a match. And then the next woman comes in. It's not a match. And then Noon, this man Noon, he's so exhausted by these 2 interviews that he makes the psychiatrist cancel the 3rd one. And then he goes out and wanders in the garden. He loves gardening. And through his eyes, we see a bunch of the other residents of the asylum, and they're in really bad shape. Not with amnesia, but all kinds of mental difficulties. And the staff of the asylum are friars, if you know what that is. I'm not exactly sure what a friar is, but anyway, so I want to read you one sentence that's right near the end of the 8 or 9 pages that I've read, just to give you a sense of how lush this is. So the they in this sentence is referring to his fellow residents, but also later it's the friars as well. They're all envious of his memory loss. Never tormented by memories or nightmares, even the friars envy him. To them, interchangeability of appearance and personality is the greatest good, a form of detachment that brings them closer to God. And they see him as the undeserving recipient of what they must earn with a lifetime of suffering. And those women were happy with his lack of memories. Everyone fills him in just as they please, like a coloring book, and he cannot stop. So I'm not even 10 pages in, it's 560 pages with tiny print. This is a pseudo buddy read with my Patreon big friend to this channel, Alina, and we're going to discuss it 4 or 5 months down the road, but oh my God, it's starting out wondrously. The book that I finished is one I started in October. Does anybody remember what I started reading for my Victorian novel in October? How many months ago is that? 5 months? And it took me this long, and I wish it had taken me longer, because now that I'm finished, I don't want to be finished. I want this story to continue. It was that good. I read Mary Barton by Elizabeth Gaskell. Oh my God, I love this. I've loved every Elizabeth Gaskell novel, and now I think this is my favorite, but I always say that. I think maybe my favorite is still the Cranford, her second novel. I don't know where this fits. Cranford was in 1853. I have never looked up when this was published. This one was published in 1848. Oh my God, this was good. So Mary Barton is a poor, beautiful young woman in, not Manchester, but in that area in England, sometime in the early 1800s. And her mother dies when she's quite young, like maybe 19 or something. Her dad is a tradesman. And the more the story progresses, her dad becomes involved in the trades union movement. And the plight of the working class, the working poor, is one of the major themes of this novel. And it was incredibly well done with a lot of rich historical detail that didn't feel, I would even feel weird using the adjective info dumpy to talk about a Victorian novel, but it doesn't feel like that. There might be too much of it if you're not interested in that theme, but she makes it all really come alive. And the next door neighbor, Jem, has always been in love with Mary, and she really likes him. They were friends since they were knee-high to a grasshopper, probably not a Victorian phrase, but she doesn't love him. She doesn't think he's husband material. And so that's one of the things in the book. And there's so much death and dying, because poor people die a lot more than rich people die. It's true today. It was true then. And Elizabeth Gaskell just pulls you in to viscerally experience what these poor people, poor as in impoverished, these poor people, one of those poors means impoverished, are experiencing in their daily lives. And it's tragic. There are moments of humor. There's a lot of love in the novel, and there is a lot of plot. Oh my God, it's a very plotty novel. It has a very moving ending, and I was almost bawling. It got to the end. But the other thing, the main thing other than the income inequality part of the story that I want to highlight is the Madonna whore complex. That's a term that I just learned when I made this video yesterday. I didn't know Freud coined it. I think Freud is overdetermined, overexposed. I think we need to move past Freud. I think most of what he had to say was ridiculous, and what wasn't ridiculous was harmful. But I suppose he did figure out one or two things. So this Freudian idea does ring true for me, that it's a complex in men and in women, but especially in men, that they view all women through the perspective of you're either a whore or you're a Madonna. And this novel dramatizes that, especially in the way that people relate to and judge or venerate at various points in the story the titular main character, Mary Barton. And I found that was the part of it that was the most interesting to me. I did a lot of this on audio only once I got far enough into the story that I wasn't confused about the characters, but maybe fully half of it I did as an audio text combo. But I did finish it up on my treadmill just with the audio, and I absolutely loved it. I think I've read now 4 or 5 of her novels. I don't know that there's any major... What haven't I read? I have not read Ruth or Sylvia's Lovers, but I've read everything else that's listed on the little bio here. And I do have a biography of Elizabeth Gaskell that I think I want to read to find out more about her. This was incredible. All right, so I'm going to start one book. This is going to be the next buddy read I have with my dear friend Gwen, who lives in Saskatoon. She chose this for us to read. She's read it, and she wanted to reread it, and she wants me to read it, and I want to read it, so it's a win-win all around. This is the Booker Prize-winning New Zealand novel, The Bone People by Keri Hulme, which won the Booker in, 1984 or 85. It is a bit of a Marmite book, apparently. Lots of people were outraged that it won the Booker. They didn't think the writing was very good, or they thought that because the author was only 1/8 Maori, that it shouldn't be considered as a Maori, as a work of indigenous fiction, or anyway. But lots of people also trumpet it, and I'll tell you which side I come down on later on, starting in the coming days. And I have the audiobook, so I'll do it as an audio text combo, unless the audio is so lovely that I can put the book down. All right, so the short story collection, Lover Man by Alston Anderson. That's, as I said, the only thing that I'm going to probably read for Black History Month, but I thought I would compensate for that paucity of Black literature by devoting my book haul to 5 works of fiction and nonfiction that I haven't hauled yet by Black authors. So here they are. The first one is a novel that is about Grenada and has Grenadian characters. The World So Wide by Zilla Jones. Zilla was my mystery guest last year sometime. I'll put a link to that. She's an African-Canadian anti-racist educator, lawyer, mother, and singer of Caribbean, Chinese, and European heritage. She lives in Winnipeg, and the protagonist is Canadian, born and raised in Winnipeg. But she's the daughter of a Grenadian woman and an absent white father. The opening, stunning. There are the first two short paragraphs. It's set in Grenada, October 1983. A soldier with a gun and a conductor with a baton. Both men who derive power from pointing sticks at women. Felicity Alexander had seen many sticks in her time, and she knew the best way to respond was to ignore the men who wielded them. Continue to sing her tempo, or keep digging this hole under the fence with her bare hands. I askin' you, what you doin'? The gun shook. The holder had a smooth face, with gangly limbs protruding through the sleeves and cuffs of his uniform. He was a boy, not yet a man. Next, this is a collection of essays and poems by the Black American writer Claudia Rankine. It's called Just Us, an American Conversation. She is a poet, essayist, and playwright, and this is a book about whiteness. I'm going to read to you from the beginning of the first essay, which is called Liminal Spaces 1. But first, let me show you, there's these curious red dots at various places in the text, and I wonder what they mean. I guess I'd have to read the book to find out. This is the opening paragraph. In the early days of the run-up to the 2016 election, I was just beginning to prepare a class on whiteness to teach at Yale University, where I had been newly hired. Over the years, I had come to realize that I often did not share historical knowledge with the persons to whom I was speaking. What's redlining? Someone would ask. George Washington freed his slaves? Someone else would inquire. What are Shirley cards, and how did they determine what was the correct skin tone balance? Yet another person wondered. But as I listened to Donald Trump's inflammatory rhetoric during the campaign that spring, the class took on a new dimension. Would my students understand the long history that informed a comment like one Trump made when he announced his presidential candidacy? When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best, he said. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists. When I heard those words, I wanted my students to track immigration laws in the United States. Would they connect the current treatment of both documented and undocumented Mexicans with the treatment of Irish, Italian, and Asian people in the last century? In preparation, I needed to slowly unpack and understand how whiteness was created. And I have double-checked to see it wasn't an error in the quote, and it was an error in douchebag Trump's speech. He should have said, of course, they're bringing those problems with them, not with us. What he said, the doofus fascist. There were two collections of short stories, and I think it was a couple years ago. I sampled stories in each of them during Black History Month, but I haven't read the whole books, and so they're yet to be hauled. And the first one is Neighbors and Other Stories by Diane Oliver. Look at that cover. She died in 1966 when she was 22, and this is her literary legacy. The first story, which I have read, is about a family where the daughter, the next day, the first black student at that school during an integration, and everybody's tense and nervous, and white people are being ridiculously, violently white, and it's just an incredibly fraught atmosphere in this story, which is ironically called Neighbors. We are from the perspective of the mother when this story opens. First two paragraphs of that title story. The bus turning the corner of Patterson and Telford Avenue was dull this time of evening. Of the four passengers standing in the rear, she did not recognize any of her friends. Most of the people tucked neatly in the double seats were women, maids and cooks on their way from work, or secretaries who had worked late and were riding from the office building at the mill. The cotton mill was out from town, near the house where she worked. She noticed that a few men were riding too. They were obviously just working men, except for one gentleman dressed very neatly in a dark gray suit and carrying what she imagined was a push-button umbrella. He looked to her as though he usually drove a car to work. She immediately decided that the car probably wouldn't start this morning, so he had to catch the bus to and from work. She was standing in the rear of the bus, peering at the passengers, her arms barely reaching the overhead railing, trying not to wobble with every lurch. But every corner the bus turned pushed her head toward a window, and her hair was coming down too. Wisps of black curls swung between her eyes. She looked at the people around her. Some of them were white, but most of them were her color. Looking at the passengers at least kept her from thinking of tomorrow. But really she would be glad when it came. Then everything would be over. Next is a work of nonfiction by the Black Canadian writer Dion Brand called Salvage, Readings from the Wreck. I acquired this after Lindy's passionate review on her channel. This came out in 2024, and it's described as a bracing look at the intersections of reading and life, and of what remains in the wreck of empire. This is a collection of essays, or it's chapters, I'm not sure which. Here are the last two paragraphs of the first chapter, or the first essay, which is called Salvage. I observe and live through the monopoly of interpretation that relegates the art of those who live through catastrophe to spectacle or pathology, and into a symbol of the always not we, not art, not an assemblage of the materials of perception that appraise and know life and what is lived, not a set of insights and gestures of transformation. So the risk of going forward here is the risk of being read by some in this way. When I use the autobiographical, it is as artifice. It is not an invitation to witness transparency. Where it appears, it will have been pored over, turned over, analyzed, refashioned as art, and made theoretical through those processes. The only place the autobiographical appears in my art, with a small vestige of itself, may be in the fictions that I write. And even then, alloyed. This book is another kind of forensics, a forensics of how a reader is made, and unmade. A forensics of the literary substance of which I am made, since it is possible that I am now mostly literary substance, and that I must recover from. And if not recover from, then piece together. And the last one is the other short story collection that I sampled last year, and it's called Heads of the Colored People by Nafisa Thompson Spires. And the first story is just mind-blowing. It's the title story, and the full title is Heads of the Colored People, 4 fancy sketches, 2 chalk outlines, and no apology. I won't try to summarize it. It's perhaps unsummarizable, but it was just incredible. I'm going to read the opening paragraph from the 5th short story, which is called Fatima the Billoquist, a transformation story. There are happier stories one could tell about Fatima. In the 90s, you could be whatever you wanted. Someone said that on the news. And by 1998, Fatima felt ready to become black, full black, ba black sheep black, black like the elbows and knees on praying folk black. If only someone would teach her. Up to that point, she had existed like a sort of colorless gas or a bit of moisture, leaving the residue of something familiar. Sweat stains on a t-shirt, hot breath on the back of a neck, condensation rings on wood, but never a fullness of whatever matter had formed them. All right, lovely people, that is my Saturday reads. Take 2 of my Friday reads, and this one you should be able to hear. Thanks for watching.